Now we get to focus fully on the true battle of the Titans in New York football. That is the New York Giants and the New York Jets. And to help us get ready for that absolute battle that we're going to see this weekend, we welcome in Jared Schwartz of the New York Post. Mr. Schwartz, good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Doing great. How are you guys?
We're doing well. Thanks for the time here on a Friday, as I know it's a very busy time of year, and we were just catching up very briefly before we went live here on The Drive. The heartbreaking news that Daniel Jones will be out once again for the New York Giants. Is that any surprise on your end? And what do you make of how the Giants will have to operate without him again?
It's interesting. Daniel Jones being out on Sunday is not a surprise, but I think what Brian Daboll also said today was a surprise. I think most people didn't expect Daniel Jones to be available Sunday. He was, he's still feeling symptoms in his neck. He's barely returned to practice this week. But today is the first time that Brian Daboll did not affirmatively answer yes, that Daniel Jones will be back this season. In the past, he has said, yes, Daniel Jones' season is not over. He's going to come back at some point. And they kind of downplayed the injury as not that serious. But today was the first time when he was asked multiple times, will Daniel Jones come back this season? He could not, give an affirmative yes. So that's a new development. That's concerning about just how serious this neck injury is. And it's concerning, just how quickly he can come back, because at this point, it doesn't seem like he's that close to coming back on the field.
Man, I mean, that's kind of a bombshell from Daboll in that regard. And I mean, it being a neck injury, then it feels like you kind of have to start thinking about long-term ramifications in terms of mobility and this guy just being able to move around. So not necessarily a welcome sight and a welcome thing to hear when you're talking about a guy who, in theory, was supposed to be building towards being your franchise quarterback.
Yeah, it's the neck thing is key. They right when he got hurt, they or not right when he got hurt, but a little bit after, they said it's not the same neck injury that he had 2 years ago,
right? Which
gave some optimism that it wasn't that serious, that he could come back quickly, that it was not going to hold him out, multiple weeks. But like you said, the neck injury is they're tricky. It's not something you can really rush. It's not something you can just play through pain, because a one bad hit can really set him back and almost put his career in jeopardy. So it's not a good injury, and the new news is certainly not optimistic.
Now, with that knowledge in place, a quick step back and your thoughts on what you've seen from how this offense has moved with Tyrod Taylor under center, because now knowing what his prognosis may be, the performances over the last 2 weeks kind of really come into focus. But what have you liked about what you've seen from the offense under him so far?
So many people after they beat the Commanders were calling for, is this Tyrod Taylor's team? Should Tyrod Taylor start at quarterback even if Daniel Jones is healthy?
Yeah.
Look, they've made Tyrod Taylor one of the highest paid backups in the league for a reason. They knew Daniel Jones has injury concerns. And if you remember 2 years ago when Daniel Jones was out, the offense was it was non-functional with Jake Fromm and
yeah.
Everybody else at the helm. So
that was ugly.
That vision has worked out well in terms of having a high quality backup ready to, and a veteran who's been around the league, ready to step in right away. And that's what he's done. He stepped in right away, and he's been able to move the offense. He's been helped by Saquon Barkley's return, which Daniel Jones didn't have before he was injured. So that certainly helped the offense as a whole. The offensive line has helped Tyrod Taylor in front of him. Justin Pugh's addition has helped solidify some things. The unit as a whole has been better. And Tyrod Taylor has been pretty good. But look, last week they scored 14 points, 0 in the second half, and they barely moved the ball in the second half. And if it wasn't for their dominant defense holding the Commanders 7 points, it could have been a different story. So, Tyrod Taylor has done good things. He's been able to move the ball. He had 2 nice completions, long completions to Jalen Hyatt. That seems like a good connection that's developing. He was able to avoid pressure, which was key. And one thing that Daboll has spoken about is he's praised him for getting the ball out quickly, which helps him avoid those pressures. He's seeing his reads. He's getting the ball out quickly. He's not, holding it and letting this depleted offensive line get beat.
Right.
He's a veteran. He knows what he's doing, and that's what they're paying him for.
Speaking of the offensive line, they seem to be giving up a lot fewer pressures over the last 2 weeks. Do you think it's just the addition of Justin Pugh and Phillips, or do you think it's, Evan Neal being out, or if it's the offensive line coach finally getting through to them and allowing them to finally mesh together?
Or a mix of everything.
All of the above. No, Justin Pugh's addition has certainly helped stabilize, much of that unit. He's, like Tyrod Taylor, he's a veteran. He's been around the block. Interestingly, he hadn't played left tackle in years, and he's kind of slotted right back in and played left tackle pretty darn well, for someone, like you said, who was off the couch. And I think it works both ways. I think Tyrod Taylor has helped the offensive line, in reverse by getting the ball out quicker, some of his mobility inside and outside the pocket. And one thing that's been key, and I actually spoke to him yesterday, was Mark Lewinsky, the guard. He's one of their higher-paid offensive linemen. He was brought in last year. And early in the year, they pretty much benched him the first chance they got. He was kind of a scapegoat for a lot of these offensive line issues. More injuries kind of forced him back in the lineup, and he's been really solid the last 2 games. He's really turned around his season. He's a veteran presence, so it helps the other young guys on the line. That has been a big development. That he's a guy who started the year as a bona fide starter. He was benched very quickly, worked his way back in the rotation, and now he's right back to playing a critical role in this offensive line.
The voice you're hearing is that of Jared Schwartz. He is on the line with us here on the Drive with Charlie and Dan, 104.5 The Team, ESPN Radio, the free 104.5 The Team app. You got to make sure you follow him on Twitter. It's at jschwartz115 for up-to-the-minute updates. He's covering the Giants, covering the Jets, and football and sports in general for the New York Post. You can read that work on New York Post and nypost.com. Flipping over to the other side of the ball, the linebacker position last year was something that you could probably point to and say was one of the weaker parts of the roster. Now that does not seem to be the case, and though Bobby Okereke is getting a lot of attention, Micah McFadden has really jumped in and played extremely well. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on his growth at that position and what it's meant to this Giants defense.
Yeah, inside linebacker for the Giants has pretty much been a glaring weakness since Antonio Pierce retired in 2009.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
I mean, since that moment, they've had, an endless carousel of just, NFL hangers-on, to put it nicely.
Yeah.
At the position. I spoke to McFadden yesterday and I actually wrote about it. Bobby Okereke next to him, they paid him the big bucks. He was the biggest free agent signing they had this offseason. But McFadden has really helped, be a catalyst to this defense's dominance. Last week against the Commanders, Pro Football Focus gave him the highest grade of any linebacker in the NFL. I mean, that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
The week before, Okereke and McFadden combined for 2 turnovers. Okereke punched a fumble out, and McFadden recovered it, and then Okereke deflected a pass, and then McFadden intercepted it. They have probably been the biggest catalyst in this defense's recent dominance the last 2 weeks. They seem to be forming a great partnership. I asked Okereke about McFadden. He said he's leaned on him more than anybody else, on this team in terms of learning the playbook, in terms of knowing where he should be on the field. And you could also tell Okereke's stature and his leadership helps McFadden in reverse. So, McFadden said last year he was a 5th-round pick, a rookie. He was kind of getting his feet wet. Defensive coordinator Wink Martindale said he kind of got his nose bloodied up a little bit last year. But he said, I wasn't playing at the level that I expect. I wasn't playing at the level that, my coaches expect. But he made no mistake. He's playing the best football of his career right now, and it's, coming at a really critical time for the Giants.
Speaking of the defense, their secondary seems to be playing quite a bit better over the last few weeks. What have you made of the impact of rookies like Deonte Banks and Trey Hawkins, and especially the impact of Jason Pinnock stepping into the shoes of Julian Love and making an impact on defense?
Banks is. I spoke to Banks as well yesterday, and he wants to cover Garrett Wilson tomorrow because the two actually faced off in 2019. Banks in Maryland, Garrett Wilson in Ohio State, and Banks's Maryland team was destroyed. I mean, they were out. And Garrett Wilson actually caught a touchdown pass on Banks, and he said, someone beats you that badly, you don't forget it, and you want to get back. And I think that really encapsulates who Banks is. He's been very solid on the field, but I think what's been most impressive is how fearless he is in wanting to cover the best receivers and, not backing down. He's already, last week he covered Terry McLaurin. He's covered Jalen Waddle. He's covered DK Metcalf. He's offered a lot of promise, for an otherwise dreary Giants season. He's offered a lot of promise. Trey Hawkins has been, a little more rough. He was one of the biggest stories coming out of training camp as a 6th-round steal. This guy from Old Dominion coming out of nowhere. He's got long arms. It hasn't quite gone as swimmingly for him, but that might be as expected for a guy from a small school, a 6th-round pick. And Jason Pinnock, it's interesting. He's been asked, and Wink Martindale have been asked, multiple times throughout the year, is there pressure to replace Julian Love, or how is he replacing Julian Love? And both of them keep saying that it's his own role. It doesn't want to be Julian Love's role, and I think that's interesting. And Pinnock's a vocal leader. He's well spoken, and he obviously came from the Jets. So this weekend, he's going back to his old stomping grounds, and he certainly wants to prove the Jets wrong, why they cut him and why the Giants signed him and why he's now a starting piece in their secondary.
All right, speaking of which, last thing before we wrap up with you, Jared, because you've been so generous with your time. 1 o'clock, CBS, MetLife Stadium, New York Jets, New York Giants. There was so much intrigue at the beginning of the season for this game. And now I ask probably the most difficult question I've asked you so far today. What excites you about this game this weekend, and what do you make of where the Jets are right now as well?
Well, the Jets had, tons of good news today. Star cornerback Sauce Gardner and they're also stud cornerback DJ Reed were both cleared from the concussion protocol, so they'll both be available.
Okay.
One thing maybe not that excites me, but that I'm intrigued by is the Jets offensive line is pretty depleted. They won't have Joe Tippmann. Dwayne Brown is not back yet. This Giants defense has dominated the last 2 weeks. They had more sacks against the Commanders than they had the entire year coming into that game. Can this Giants pass rush, can Kayvon Thibodeau wreck this game and really take over? And that's probably the Giants' best path to victory is can this pass rush give Zach Wilson nightmares and, make Zach Wilson make those mistakes that we know that Zach Wilson sometimes can. So that's something that really intrigues me.
We'll see how that one goes. You're right, Zach Wilson, not unfamiliar with making a couple of mistakes, and hopefully the Giants can force those as well. Jared Schwartz with us again. You got to read his coverage of the Giants, Jets, and the NFL at nypost.com and follow him on Twitter at jschwartz115. Mr. Schwartz, pleasure to catch up with you here on this Friday on the Drive. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the game, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you guys so much. Always a pleasure.